Share content, share the screen, start the broadcast, and okay, you should have it on the screen now. Yes? Somebody just tell me if you could see it.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let me just get to the right place. Okay. So we now spoke about three issues, three different Gemaras. We had the Gemara dealing with the fact that the Sota's hair is removed, and that clearly, the covering of her hair is removed. So we see clearly from that is an issue. We've seen the idea of Das Moshe and Das Yehudis, and a woman going without her hair covered is a problem of Das Yehudis. We kind of resolved the two issues, that for a person going completely with their hair removed, that would seem to be, according to most opinions, a biblical prohibition. However, if she goes, but to have at least some of the hair should be covered from biblical level. And then if you're leaving too much of that, like some of your hair is covered, but some hair is still not covered, that would be the rabbinic prohibition. Then we mentioned the idea of erva, that you cannot read the Shema in front of a woman who is with her hair is uncovered. Okay, so now we're going to take this to the next level as history progressed. So let's read on. In recent history, predominantly under modern European influence, there have been entire communities of Torah observant Jews in which the women have gone bareheaded. There are also many recent examples of pious, righteous women who have not covered their heads. Now, what is this based on, and what were the rabbis doing about it? So, building on the minority opinion that head covering is not a biblical level obligation, so that we're looking at one leniency, and on the complexity of halachic sources regarding head covering, as we see. So some rabbis have responded to this situation by crafting a halachic justification for leaving the head completely uncovered. Most prominent of these was Rav Yosef Masas, a Sephardi halachic authority of 20th century Morocco in Israel. In his response on the topic, Rav Masas explains that his position was designed, very careful, listen now, to be malamed schus, meaning to judge favorably on the women of Morocco of the 1950s who did not cover their heads at all. And now we're going to see the main point of that tshuva, 2 points. So he says, now remember, you got to be a big rabbi to be able to make such a statement, but not necessarily everyone's going to agree with it. So he says the prohibition of uncovering the head for married women was strict amongst us here from past practice. And thus, in all cities of the Maghreb before the coming of the French. But within a short time of their coming, the daughters of Israel broke this boundary, and no reproof was of use. And now all the women go out with head bare, hair uncovered. And therefore I put my mind to teaching about them favorably. Okay, Lalamed Elohim Schus, for it's impossible to conceive of returning the matter as was. And in my approach to seek in the words of the halachic authorities that came before me, I found only stringency upon stringency and prohibition upon prohibition. Okay, so this is the beginning of his response. So what's he saying? He's saying, well, if I'm going to permit women to go with their heads uncovered, I'm really going against the grain of all major halachic authorities, including himself. So now, what he's going to say is the way he's going to want to justify the practice. Again, let's make this clear. He's not saying that a woman should go with their hair uncovered, but he's seeing that women aren't having it covered. So he's trying, just like, let's try to understand this idea. It's a very important point we're bringing up here. Just like if you see somebody doing something wrong, you have to judge them favorably. You know, maybe the guy didn't know whatever, that what he was doing was wrong or whatever. We always have to judge people favorably. So now when people are violating a common practice of halacha, you know, you have to see if it's possible to judge them favorably, that maybe there's some kind of opinion, even a minority opinion, that we could say that their behavior fits this. Because, you know, you have to balance. It's a very tricky balance in halacha. If the halacha says A, and people don't agree with that, don't do it anymore, they're assimilating. So now the question is, how are you going to deal with it? You're going to call a bunch of sinners, and every Shabbos they come to Shul, you got to say, ladies, you're doing the wrong thing, you have to cover your hair. I mean, he did that, and they weren't listening. So now what are you going to do? So try to figure out, you know, it's not, you know, part of, there's a concept of the Jewish soul. The Jewish soul is connected to Hashem, if you understand it or not. So there's this idea that if many Jews are doing something that would appear to be wrong, maybe there's some minority opinion that what they're doing would fit into that, as opposed to saying that they're totally all doing it completely wrong without any possible justification. So he's trying to find some minority lenient way that we could say, okay, at least it fits some kind of lenient position. Okay, now you can't do this all the time. For example, if people say, I'm going to go to work on Shabbos, we can't say, well, there's a minority opinion that says you can work on Shabbos. There's no minority opinion at all for that. There's certain things there is no minority opinion. But as we've already been looking, and we look in the Rishonim, you know, there is certain minority opinions. So therefore, he wants to suggest the only way we could work this out to find some position for them to rely on is a minority opinion that says that the whole idea of covering the hair is not biblical, but only a matter of custom. And then he suggests the custom is void once head covering is no longer associated with modesty. And that happens when all the women go with their hair uncovered. Let's read what he says inside. The prohibition is not from the uncovered hair itself, but rather from the custom of the daughters of Israel, who were accustomed to cover their hairs because they thought at their time that this was modesty for a woman, and a woman who uncovered her hair was considered a breaker of the boundary of modesty. And for this reason, the Torah warned all daughters of Israel not to do the opposite of the custom of the daughters of Israel in this. If so, now that all daughters of Israel agree that there's no modesty in covering the head, the prohibition has been fundamentally uprooted and has become permissible. Now, this is a really wild idea. He's suggesting that the obligation no longer exists once the custom changes. This concept is a very debatable point, okay? And especially if you view that the obligation to cover the hair is more than the Das Yehudis. So he offered that as judging them favorably. Again, he himself really didn't agree with it. So most of the modern poskim overwhelmingly rejected his idea. And also, in many of our communities, there's still women who practice head covering and do associate with modesty, which takes away the argument. So this was like a really big point. The point being that there's a minority opinion that says the only prohibition is because we're going against the customs of modesty. And in days of yore, all women who were modest covered their hair. Now that the world doesn't do that anymore, so therefore, that's no longer considered a custom of modesty. Now, this is in areas that is not mamish, an erva area. In other words, he would agree if all women would now become nudists, okay, he would not suggest, well, I guess that's the new standard of modesty. because there's certain parts of your body you've got to cover up. The real, for sure, areas of erva have to be covered up. But, with the hair covering, all right, that's, it would seem that it's biblical, but there's a minority opinion that associates some degree of prohibition because of custom. And therefore, because of custom, if they don't have the custom to do it anymore, it doesn't become the law. Okay, most poskim disagreed with it. Okay, so therefore, we don't rely on that. However, we will see next week the Aruch HaShulchan uses this idea in another context. Okay, so in other words, we'll deal with next week. So what happens if you're in a shul and women don't cover their hair? All right, so that's going to be next week's discussion. What I want to do now, so therefore, it would seem for most poskim that women have to cover their hairs. It's still in force till today with this minority opinion trying to judge people favorably. Okay, anyway. So now we're going to move to the next stage and try to give, we're kind of left the Talmudic halachic, the black and white halacha. Let's try to move into more of the hashkafa, the outlook. You have halacha, this is the law, says like this, and you just say that's the law. But then we try to understand it. So this gets a little bit, you're trying to explain it to people, and although we just say this is the will of Hashem, and that's it. But try to have some, just like we have tamei ha-mitzvahs, reasons for mitzvahs. Although our keeping the mitzvahs not contingent upon us agreeing or understanding the reasons, but at least makes it more palatable to feel that we're doing something useful, so to speak. So there's a number of concepts that we draw out from the Talmud to show why it's something that should be done. So topic number one is called dignity. There seems to be some idea of covering your head is an idea of dignity. So you have to remember, in the times of the Talmud, woman's head covering was like nearly a universal practice. Even for non-Jews, they covered their hair. Now, the Gemara mentions men sometimes cover their heads and sometimes bare their heads. But women always cover their heads. So Gemara says, Gemara Nedarim, all women cover their heads. So head covering was so widespread that it was seen as a matter of basic respectability or propriety, and an uncovered head was considered to be a disgrace. Okay, this is, so hard for us to relate to this with like no modesty at all in the world now. But this is the way it was. A woman's head covering was so fundamental to her dignity in public. Look at this, that the Mishnah is going to list how that if someone would forcibly uncover a woman's head, it would be like humiliating the person and having halachic consequences. This you have to understand. Let's look at a Mishnah in Bava Kama talking about a person damaging another person. So first statement is someone who hits the fellow in the ear. Okay? So for the shame of that, okay, he has to pay a sela punishment. That's 4 zuz. Okay? Rabbi Yossi Haglili says, no, it's so embarrassing, you have to pay a mana, 100 zuz. What if somebody slaps somebody? For that indignity, you have to pay 200 zuz. If you slap him with the back of your hand, 400 zuz. If you pull his ear, pull out his hair, spit, and the spit reaches him, removed his outer garment from him, like his jacket, uncovered the head of a woman in the marketplace, he gives him 400 zuz, gives her 400 zuz. So what do you see from that, Gemara? You see that when you do that to a woman, you're disgracing her. You're taking away her dignity. So it's no different than spitting at a woman or removing someone's outer garment. So when you are willfully disgracing another person, okay, So in addition to asking for forgiveness, you have to pay 400 zuz. Now let's understand how much 400 zuz is. When the Mishnah pay a list, what qualifies a person as being a poor person? How much assets? What's below the poverty line? How much money's in the bank? So the Gemara says if he has less than 200 zuz, that means he's poor. Anything more than 200 more, you're not allowed to get tzedakah because it raises you above the poverty line. So the penalty for uncovering a woman's hair is 400 zuz. That's double the poverty line. That's a lot of money. So therefore, it's clear that a respectable woman would not appear bareheaded in public, and removing her hair was an assault to her dignity. So therefore, the first concept is women cover their hair for their dignity. That's point one. Yes, Stan has a question from the audience live.
Yeah, a question.
And I'll repeat his question. You won't be able to hear it because he's far away.
The question is that he's using the monetary values to make a comparison of that, because even though it obviously makes a lot of sense that this is 400, this is 400, don't you go through a slippery slope if you say that this is worth this much, this is the penalty here, you find another mitzvah, and this is the penalty here, and then you go into that, well, this is less than that. You understand? You're using money as a measure of the damage or the severity of the item. I'm just kind of curious there that, I mean, we'll all agree on it's like, yeah, well, obviously, if it's 100, it's less, that's 400, no. But now we're talking about sort of the severity of the mitzvah.
Okay, so Stan's asking how we understanding the severity of a mitzvah based on monetary fines that we put on people. So the answer is the fact that we put any kind of monetary fine at all means that someone has done an injustice to the victim. So now, if a person normally goes in the street with their hair uncovered, if people don't cover their hair, and somebody decides to cover their hair, which is against the norm, then you have not taken away any dignity from them, right? Then we wouldn't fine them. But the fact that the rabbis say we fine someone to such a large extent because you took someone's head covering off, that means you've insulted them. Now, what do you say I insulted them? The answer is must be a woman would never be caught dead with her head uncovered in the street. And now the fact that, how do we know that? Because we levy such a stiff fine, just like if you spit someone, if you spit at somebody, that's disgracing the person, right? So now if you're removing something that everybody goes covered, it's so embarrassing. You know, what if I took all your clothes off in public? I mean, everybody goes with clothes in public. So we're saying that is, if it's such an embarrassment to take off the head covering, that means there's a certain degree of dignity that a person has by having it on. And when you remove their dignity, that's embarrassment and shame, which has a legal ramification of paying money. So clearly that was what went on there. So that's the way it was. That's the way respectability is, because society, secular society, it doesn't come from the Jews. It comes from secular society. It says we don't want to be moral. We don't want to be. Let's make a similar example. Lahavdil. The Jewish people kept the Shabbos. Fine. The non-Jews kept Sunday. Now, obviously, didn't have the same halachas of Shabbos, but long ago, Sunday was a holy day. And every goy went to church, plain and pasha. And you did not work on Sunday. And from that came all those blue laws in modern countries who said stores are all closed. That's the way the goyish world was even until the 40s, 50s, and 60s, I think even into the 70s, except for emergency, vital things like the gas station or something like that. It was closed. I mean, we're forgetting. It's not that long ago, guys. It was in our lifetime. right? But guess what? They all decided, you know what? We work so hard. There's nothing to do on Sunday. Used to be you went to church and you sat at home and you talked to your family. You had a big Sunday supper, and they socialized. But as time passed and the society shifted, now technology and this and all these other things, and it became so much easier to go shopping and buying and this and that. And people were less spiritual, obviously, so they just said, no more keeping Sunday blue laws. So now one could suggest, well, I guess we don't have to keep Shabbos anymore because it's not a standard anymore. No, but the Goyish world, we don't look at standards by the Goyish world. And therefore, we don't consider it. So therefore, we don't consider the fact that a woman should now not be dressed modestly, even though the non-Jewish world does not believe in that. So that's one consideration. I'm going to skip the next one for the purpose of time. So the first was dignity. Second point is modesty. Okay, as we said, it's a part of Das Yehudis. So again, the Rambam says, what is Das Yehudis? So he defines what Das Yehudis is. Look at the Rambam. It's a matter of modesty. This dignity is one point, modesty is a different point. A married woman was expected to adhere to high standards of modesty more than a single woman because of her commitment to her husband. Okay? And now they're saying that a woman's hair, at least once she is married, may have a status like erva, which would interfere with a man's ability to say the Shema. And where it applies, covering would be seen as an act of modesty, like an extension of covering the erva itself. Let's see what the Maral teaches that modesty and dignity are closely related. He says, whoever is not sanua, you're not modest, disgrace and shame befalls him in accordance with the attribute he is drawn to, for it, immodesty is far from honor and comfort. So the Maral intertwines the two. If you don't have modesty, you lose your respect from people. Okay? Now, modest behavior sets a boundary of propriety between public and private. The ability to maintain this type of boundary demonstrates self-respect and invites the respect of others. Conversely, immodest behavior can lead to disrespect. That is a very powerful point. In other words, if you show all your goods, let's say you're an attractive woman, and you want everybody to know that, people don't respect you for that. They don't respect you when you just let everything out there. It's no different, for example, let's say you're a person, you talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And not everything you say is necessarily so thoughtful. You know what happens after a while? People don't pay attention to you. They disrespect you. When a woman says, here, look at my attractive body, so they say, this woman is a tramp. You don't feel any sense of respect. The idea when you hold things back and you hide it within yourself, that means the person's not showy and the people respect that. So that's what he's saying. Now, those standards of modesty can sometimes change. Some measure of modesty is a prerequisite to being dignified. For this reason, the sources about Das Yehuda, the broader idea that I say, what happened over here? 1 second, I don't know what happened over here. Okay, so the source about Das Yehudis and Erva contribute to the broader idea that our sages view head covering as signifying a woman's dignity. Now they quote a certain Rabbanit, more modern woman, who explains in an article, why do I love my head covering? So you're hearing from a woman's perspective now. Covering the head every day anew creates a healthy distinction for me between home and outside. between private and public, between mine and everyone's. This is a distinction in our day has utterly faded in a culture that constantly tells us, belong to everyone, put it on display, show off your looks, seek approval, and get a like, even at home. Take a selfie and distribute it all over. This is a totally goyish concept. There's a difference between a woman who thinks beauty is improper and therefore obscures her beauty, and one who loves beauty, but wants to channel a part of it to realms that are exclusively hers. By the way, I would not be able to find this meaning in head covering if I experienced, God forbid, as something that makes me ugly. So in other words, people are saying, why are women making themselves ugly? So saying this does not make it ugly. It's just I'm saving this as part of my own personal self-esteem, and it's not that I need other people's approval for this. Okay, that's the third thing. And the fourth one, it displays your marital status. Okay, so there's other meaning for this. It's a sign of the Jewish woman being married. This is a correlated to be halach this is a correlated to the halachic obligation to cover their hair, but not a source for it. Not a source, but it's a corollary. So, for example, the one place in the Torah says a non-Jewish maidservant was known to be free of a certain marital bond with a manservant as soon as she went out with her hair uncovered in the marketplace. That is a public square. The Gemara says, non-Jew now, that set aside a maidservant for his manservant. From when has he permitted her again to other men? When is she considered not tied down to this other servant? He said when she uncovers her hair in the marketplace. What does that imply? As long as she was in a relationship, the non-Jewish woman was careful to cover her head in public, making clear she's not available to other people. So in other words, head covering, so to speak, is a function of a sign of a woman's relationship status. So the same thing can be said about a Jewish woman's marital status, but in a little different way. The Mishnah already says a Jewish woman would begin covering her head upon marriage, but not uncover her head if she were widowed or divorced, which is another aspect that has to be spoken about. Thus, head covering indicates that a woman either is currently married or has been married in the past. Why is this halachically significant? The difference is what her ksuba would be. If she's never been married, she gets a ksuba of 200 zuz. If she's been married before, it's 100 zuz. So therefore, when you notice a woman her hair is covered, that means she's already been married at one time. And then this could have a lot to do with witnesses. If a person has a monetary claim, she has a monetary claim for the ksuba, and let's say you lost the ksuba, and we don't know what was agreed to, but if people witness can say, but I see she had her hair covered before she married this guy, that becomes a proof, 100% proof, that she does not get the full 200 ksuba. So also, it could very well be that the woman, when she uncovers her hair, it's uncovered, it signals to other men she's available and she's not married. And that's another concept. And we can take this a little bit further, combining the idea before. There are certain things you only share with your spouse and you don't share with other people. Just like certain private feelings, you don't spell out to the world. You shouldn't. You should only share it with your spouse. So certain parts of the woman should only be shared with her husband. And just like the very private parts are like that, so too her hair and other parts of the body that should be covered. This is reserved only for her husband. And she wants that to be beautiful only for her husband and not for other people. That's another part of the dignity and the sacredness of the marriage bond that exists. Okay, next week, Tony, we didn't forget about you. We're going to get into to try to wrap this up and now apply it to shaitels and this and that and all these other things. So we'll have some conclusions that we can draw from all of this. Okay, now we can see everybody and say goodbye to. Oh, Steve, you're in all the way from cottage country. Okay. Excellent.
I'm
All
still
right.
here, guys.
Yeah. All right. So that's good. Even when you're far away, you could be in the shear.
Zach,
Okay. Shkoyach, everybody. What's that?
We'll see Stan at 8:20. See you, Stan.
Oh, okay. Very good. All right. Shkoyach, everybody.
Yeah.
We'll see you later. Okay. Bye-bye.